There is no doubt this week's public hearings will mark a dramatic new pivot point in this impeachment process. For the first time, the American people will hear for themselves from the people who worked for Donald Trump, describing Donald Trump's attempted bribery plot. Diplomats Bill Taylor and George Kent testifying Wednesday, Marie Yovanovitch on Friday.
Those open hearings will be an opportunity for the American people to evaluate the witnesses for themselves, but also to learn firsthand about the facts of the president's misconduct.
What you are about to see with your own eyes could be the most significant public investigative hearings since Watergate.
Good morning. At this hour, a select committee of the United States Senate is about to begin public hearings on something called Watergate. Senator Ervin will be the man wielding the gavel during these hearings. And there goes the gavel, and the Watergate hearings are underway.
There goes the gavel. Those hearings changed everything. The Watergate committee hearings were widely watched, widely debated, widely discussed, and they lasted 51 days, leading, of course, to some of the most famous quotes in political and really American history.
What did the president know, and when did he know it?
Mr. Butterfield, are you aware of the installation of any listening devices in the Oval Office of the president?
I was aware of listening devices. Yes, sir.
I began by telling the president that there was a cancer growing on the presidency, and if the cancer was not removed, the president himself would be killed by it.
The presidency was killed by it ultimately. 250 hours of those proceedings were broadcast live to America. 71% of the public told Gallup they watched at least some of the hearings. And as what came to clearly be seen as damning testimony played out day after day after day, well, the evidence presented in those hearings turned the tide of public opinion across the political spectrum. President Nixon's approval rate plummeted as his own aides, his own staff, his own hand-picked employees revealed a conspiracy at the heart of the Nixon presidency. I want to bring in an all-star panel to look at some of these parallels and dig in. Dahlia Lithwick, a senior editor at Slate, who's written about the Supreme Court, also hosts their Legal Affairs podcast. Melissa Murray, an NYU law professor and former clerk to then Judge Sotomayor. And Jacob Weisberg, a best-selling author and journalist, is CEO of the podcast company Pushkin Industries. Great to have all of you here.
Thank you, Ari.
It's fun to take a moment and really dig into this beyond each incremental advancement in this story, Dahlia. As you look at both the parallels in history and what's coming in this next week, what stands out to you?
I think the two things that are different from Watergate that are worth watching are, one, that statistic you just said, 71% of people told Gallup that they watched. We are not going to have 71% of America watching anything because we have such an atomized, fragmented media world. I think that there are going to be a lot of Americans who are just watching Benghazi or whatever the Benghazi, whether it's witch hunt or
even more broadly, people have more options to look at recipes on Facebook. I mean, this was a world when the politics followed what was available in media, and it was just a couple channels.
Yeah, that, and I think the other thing is that Republicans came in line, that over the course of the Watergate hearing, you saw Republicans taking it very seriously, and we have not had a lot of evidence of Republicans willing to say, I'm going to take this seriously. Quite the opposite. We have Lindsey Graham saying, la, 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 I'm not even going to listen.
So I might push back a little bit. I think that there are lots of different platforms that people can look at now for their news, but everyone's going to be talking about this to some degree. So even to that extent, it's going to be oversaturated. People will have no choice but to take part. And maybe that will turn the tide. And I think that's certainly something the Democrats are counting on, that the severity of the allegations will become apparent to the public, and more importantly, will become apparent to the GOP, that they will not be able to stay with this precedent, that something will break, and many Republicans will have to put country over party and break ranks.
The bad news, Ari, is that nobody's looking at the evidence. I mean, in the Watergate days, and that is our template for all of this, I think there were Democrats who were genuinely reluctant to impeach the president, and there were Republicans who were genuinely open to the possibility that he'd committed impeachable offenses. And in those hearings, there was a live evaluation of evidence by at least some of the members of the committee. I don't think we're going to see that this time. I think minds are made up. And what are they reading? Instead of evidence, Republicans are reading the polls. That doesn't mean that it's absolutely impossible, pardon me, that any of them will turn against the president or vote against the president. But they will do it on the basis of polls, not on the basis of evidence.
Right, and that's the interplay that always exists in a democracy, but is more pronounced in an environment where people's views are either very bubbled and hardwired, inclined to see things a certain way unless there's an overwhelming evidence. However, to the extent, Jacob, you want to look at this as similar to a criminal trial, that there is the Constitution says this is not a trial per se, but there is a high burden of proof as in a trial because you're doing something extraordinary, which is removing potentially the sitting president. Then you need a lot of proof. That may be a good thing. And yet here we have, I'm going to read some proof to you from Ambassador Taylor. This is the person Donald Trump put in charge. This is the person who was in the room. This is not the resistance. This is not a critic, and it's not the media. And he says in these newly released depositions, his clear understanding was security assistance money wouldn't come until Ukraine pursued the political investigations Trump wanted to help him win re-election. And the chairman asked, so if they don't do this, they're not going to get that, was your understanding? The ambassador says, yes, sir. That is this for that.
I think Republicans don't even know how they're defending the president. There's a basic question. Are they trying to argue that he did not solicit foreign interference in an American election? Or are they trying to say he did that, but it's okay that he did that? That's one of the things that presidents are allowed to do.
Right. Did he demand a bribe to help himself? That's abusing his office. That's the power of the office for the bribe. That's getting the investigation. And did that happen? Or did it happen and you're going to say, yes, but we don't want to remove him?
So are they going to argue the facts or argue the law? Right. But in fact, they're arguing neither. I mean, I think both would be essentially preposterous on their face at this point, based on that evidence and more, that it's just become overwhelming that he was extorting the president of Ukraine or soliciting a bribe, or call it whatever you want. He was demanding interference in our election in exchange for aid which had been appropriated to help Ukraine defend itself against Russia.
So let's take that to Dahlia. I mean, how important is it beyond the particulars that the case against the president involve protecting democracy itself? Because to your point, there were people in the country who feel that whatever happened with Russia, Bob Mueller did an exhaustive investigation and he didn't charge anyone for an election conspiracy. There are people who feel that the Russia stuff was ultimately overplayed at a criminal level when Bob Mueller didn't find a Russia-U.S. criminal conspiracy. And now they're hearing, oh, well, no, he's doing it with Ukraine. And you could forgive people for being skeptical. And yet the truth is, it appears the president is trying to subvert democracy. If that's not impeachable, what is?
Well, that's why I think Nancy Pelosi, when she very reluctantly came to the conclusion she was going to have to announce an inquiry and then the vote on the impeachment, she was so careful to center this on constitutional norms, constitutional values. I think what she wanted to say is, we're not going to turn this into no collusion, right? No collusion became, I mean, you covered this as well as anybody.
I remember it a little bit.
But no collusion.
I was here. I was around.
No collusion was the way you took what you just described in the Mueller report and turned it into a thing that was not a legal word and that Trump said over and over again. And then Bill Barr, the attorney general, knowing it was not a legal conclusion, announced, right? That's what no quid pro quo.
And I want to be clear as you build on this point. Both things can be true. In other words, there may be things that people strongly object to. Russia did meddle. People did commit crimes. The Mueller probe was on the level. And it can also be true that in fairness, and I've reported this, as you say, many times, no one on the Trump campaign was ever charged, let alone convicted, for a Russian conspiracy. In fairness.
In fairness. And it's ironic that that's exactly the thing we're looking at again, right? The day after the Mueller probe concludes, Donald Trump picks up the phone, right? Yeah. And does the day after Mueller testifies. So this is the same pattern. It's the pattern of, are you going to use the levers of power for your own personal gain? It's not a different story. And I think that when we get really bogged down in, we're going to talk about what a quid pro quo is under, criminal law. No, don't get bogged down again on the legal nomenclature that gets imported onto an impeachable inquiry. This is about impeachable offenses, not criminal law.
So I think that's right. And, there's this whole discussion going on now from Rand Paul about how the president needs to be able to confront witnesses because the Sixth Amendment demands that. The Sixth Amendment does demand that for criminal trials. This is not a criminal trial. This is an impeachment. It happens under the Constitution, and the Constitution doesn't prescribe any real rules or constitutional norms for it. All of this gets worked out by the Senate. So it's not the same as a criminal trial, and we're not seeking to prove beyond a reasonable doubt an actual criminal act. It is the sort of broader high crimes and misdemeanors is the abuse of office. And I think
although Rand Paul he's been very fair. He was holding the same positions about Obama.
Always. And Rand Paul, who wants us to confront and reveal the whistleblower, who has always been so emphatic about the need to protect whistleblowers. So he's having a bit of a crisis.
His positions, I want to be clear, are what is known as a due process hot mess.
It's a technical legal term, but yes, due process hot mess is what the scholars are calling it. But again, I think you need to come back to it's going to be really important when people watch on their television, see these career professionals. These are not partisans. These are not Obama people. These are not Democrats. These are foreign service professionals who have given their professional lives in service to this country saying, I saw things that were so unorthodox that it gave me pause. Bill Taylor says he almost didn't accept the posting in Ukraine because he thought the way the foreign policy was being run was so unorthodox and such a mash. I mean, he didn't want to participate. And then he's saying what I saw just looked to me like the highest levels of corruption at worst, complete incompetency at best.
Right. And those are the echoes of Watergate, where the key witnesses, by definition, because they're giving firsthand accounts, what are called fact witnesses, they had to be there. And most of them, not all, but most of them are there because Donald Trump and his aides picked them, which makes them really devastating in that way. Then, Jacob, you turn to all the people in the Senate who would be the role of jurors, but many of them are running for president. Mitch McConnell alluding to that in his McConnellish way. Take a look.
So the question is just how long does the Senate want to take? How long do the presidential candidates want to be here on the floor of the Senate instead of in Iowa and New Hampshire?
What do you hear there?
Well, there's a little bit of a veiled thing about, oh, you guys want to be off campaigning. We're going to keep you tied down in the Senate. They might want to call that bluff. I mean, every day that the Senate trial is going on is a bad day for Donald Trump. I think the interest of the Republicans is in getting it over as quickly as possible. And actually, I think the interest of the Democrats is in stretching it out. There may be individual candidates who on any given day are going to hate having to be in Washington and would rather be in Iowa. But overall, in terms of any day you're running that headline, impeachment, today an impeachment, it's bad news for the president. And that's the thing that hasn't changed from Watergate.
Right. Jacob Weisberg, Melissa Murray, and Dahlia Lithwick, really appreciate you kicking off our special here. Interesting stuff. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.